Hello, everyone. Welcome to Manthano Parenting Conference. It's really, really good to have you here with us today. Thank you for taking out time from your busy schedule to be with us. And it's such an honor to have Dr. Kelly Flanagan with us today. Hi, Kelly.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me join you.
It really is a privilege. And Dr. Kelly Flanagan, he is an author, speaker, consultant, and licensed clinical psychologist. His writing has been featured in Reader's Digest and the Huffington Post, and he has appeared on Today's Show with his daughter. Kelly is the author of 2 nonfiction books, Loveable, Embracing What is Truest About You so you can truly embrace your life and true companions, a book for everyone about the relationships that see us through. That one's called True Companions. Both books debuted as the #1 new release in interpersonal relations on Amazon. His first novel, The Unhiding of Elijah Campbell, will be released October 18, 2022. Kelly is married to another clinical psychologist named Kelly, and they have 3 children, 18, 14, and 12 years old. They live in a small town outside of Chicago. So today he will be sharing from his book, Loveable. So what inspired you to write such a wonderful book?
Oh, well, thank you for that introduction, by the way. So I suppose the inspiration for Loveable it starts in 2012 when I began to discover my own sense of lovability for the first time in my adult life. And we'll talk today about what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. And discovered, wait, I've been wanting to write. I've been wanting to write my whole life, and I've never given myself permission to do it. And so at the time, what I started to do, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I thought, well, I'll start to blog, and I'll sort of get to practice this passion for writing while sort of informing people about the services that I provide and that sort of thing. Quickly fell in love with writing, and it became much more than a professional blog very quickly. And I started publishing letters to my daughter actually on the blog. And the second letter that I published to her I suppose it was the beginning of 2014, was a letter from the makeup aisle to her about her inherent beauty and her inherent sense of meaningfulness and purpose in the world. And that letter went really, really viral. And to the point where I was sitting in my office one day after meeting with a therapy client, and I got a phone call. And they said, "Hey, this is the Today Show. We'd like your daughter and you to come on to the Today Show and tell us more about this letter that you've written to her." So we wound up on the Today Show. And when that happens, you start to get, calls from people you wouldn't normally get calls from. I got connected to a really great literary agent who said, "Hey, I think, your writing is really striking a chord with people. It's probably time for you to write a book." I was like, well, I've always wanted to do that. So let's do that.
Amazing.
And yeah, it was amazing. And she said, well, so these letters to your kids, they're really striking a chord. Probably you should write a parenting book. So I went home to my wife, who is actually, I'm an adult clinical psychologist. My wife is the child psychologist. And I said to my wife, Kathy, my agent, she thinks that I should write a parenting book. And my wife said, "You have no business writing a parenting book." Ironically, here on a parenting conference, because really, I most of what I've learned about parenting specifically, I've learned from her. And so I got to thinking, and I thought, well, if it's not the parenting element of these letters that's speaking to people, what is it exactly? And so I went through all of the emails I was receiving at the time, and I was getting thousands of them at that time. And I realized that the main response to the letters I was writing to my daughter, it wasn't like, well, I'm going to take this letter and give it to my daughter, or I'm going to write a letter like this to my granddaughter. It was adult men and women saying, I needed to hear these words. Mm-hmm. I needed to be reminded that I'm worthy, that I'm valuable, that I'm not alone, that I belong, that I matter, that I have a reason for being here. I needed to be reminded that I'm lovable. And that was sort of the moment where it hit me. We all still have a little kid inside of us waiting on a love letter. We all still have a little kid inside of us waiting on a love letter. And that became the inspiration for Loveable. This idea that we came into the world created in the image of God, knitted together in our mother's womb, fearfully and wonderfully made. And that part of us is still in there, waiting to be reminded of what it is, right? But certainly part of the inspiration for writing Loveable, and really for the way I've looked at life and humanity ever since I became a father, was to watch these kids come into the world, right? And your kids come into the world, and to them, their worthiness is self-evident at the beginning, right? They're pretty sure they're worthy of getting fed. They'll cry for it till they get it, right? They don't have a lot of self-consciousness about how they show up. They dress how they want. They act how they want. Their sense of I am lovable no matter what is sort of inherent. But of course, as adults, we're far removed from that sense of connection to our worthiness. So I started to reflect on and explore with the people I worked with, how does that happen? How do we get from our inherent sense of worthiness to where we're at as adults? And how do we get back to it? And so really that became the foundation of my book, Loveable. And so the book is really, it's about sort of what I think of as the four main stages we go through in the development of our selfhood. And the first stage is really that original innocence, right? Created by God, worthy of love and belonging, designed to give love and to get love. Everything is pretty simple at that stage. But then all of us at some point, every single human being at some point encounters something that we call shame. And it is the message or the belief that we are not good enough to be loved the way that we are. And so the idea is that, and I think it's important to clarify, by the way, especially for audiences of faith, that there's a difference between shame and guilt. Because I think for a lot of people of faith, we go, wait, shame is a good thing. If we do something wrong, we're supposed to feel bad and do something to fix it. But we now understand that that's actually guilt. That's a feeling we call guilt, which is actually the opposite of shame.
Okay.
So one way of thinking of the two is that guilt is an awareness that we've done something wrong and that we want to correct it. Whereas shame is the sense that we are something bad and there is nothing we can do about it. And so guilt is a very it's a sort of a holy emotion. It's wired into our souls, and it is designed to activate us. Oh, wait, I made a mistake. I did something wrong. Let me fix it. Let me apologize for it. Let me redeem it. Whereas shame is the belief that I am something wrong. There's nothing I can do about it. So the only thing I can do is hide. The only thing I can do is hide myself, right? And then shame feeds on the hiddenness. The remarkable thing about shame is as soon as you speak it out loud, it diminishes. But the more you hide it, the more it grows, right? So at some point in life, we experience the message, not that we did something wrong. That's great, right? You say this to your kids all the time. We don't do that. You need to go apologize, right? But the message that you are something wrong, you're irredeemable, and there's nothing you can do about that, is a message that we get in various subtle ways. You're not lovable the way you are. You need to be something different to be lovable. And so we pick that up as young children at a very early age. Now, the first thing I want parents to know coming out of this, because I know every parent listening to this, every parent group I've ever spoken to right now, if they're sitting in front of me, I can see the looks on their faces and their eyes are getting wide and they're like, oh no, like if I shamed my children.
You thought, you remember a past experience and you go, oh my goodness, I wonder what.
Yeah, I remember yesterday with my kids, I made mistakes, right? And so my encouragement to parents is absolutely, yes, you've shamed your children. We all do that. Whatever shame we still carry within us that has not been transformed and redeemed gets transmitted to other people. We pass it on. Happens all the time, right? The irony is that if we're ashamed of that as parents, we'll hide it and we won't do anything about it. Whereas if we can say, hey, I'm like everybody else, I carry some shame around in me. I occasionally communicate that shame to my kids by in various ways communicating that they need to be different to be loved. When that happens, all of a sudden we can act on that that accidental transmission of shame. We can even say to our kids, like, hey, don't ever let me not tell the truth about who you are. If I ever send you the message that you're not lovable exactly the way you are, call me out on it. You know, catch me in the act and tell me that it's not true. Stand up to me, right? What a powerful thing to invite our kids to stand up to moments where we accidentally communicate shame. So my first encouragement to parents is, yes, you do it, but you don't need to be ashamed of it. It's normal for us to do it. We can take responsibility for it and ownership of it and invite our kids into a dialogue about it. Okay. So that's the second stage. The first stage, we arrive with a true self, good enough, worthy of love and belonging. In the second stage, we begin to doubt that self, that true self. We start to feel shame. And then in the third stage, and this is probably where most of the parents that are listening today, this is probably the stage that they're in, is that our kids then, we all did it. We have this very rational thought, okay, if my true self isn't good enough for love and belonging, if the self God created for me isn't good enough for love and belonging, I must need to create a new self that is. And so this is where we begin to build our own false self, or something that psychologists call the ego. And so we build a self that is designed to go out into the world and get us the love and belonging we think we don't deserve based upon who we are, right? And most of our children, this usually starts in 3rd and 4th grade and continues all the way into early adulthood, right? And so this is a hard stage for a lot of parents because we're watching our kids become something other than what we know them to be, right? I think it can be helpful.
What age is a 3rd or 4th grade, just for the UK audience?
Oh, right, because I'm an American. That's right.
Yeah.
You know, let's see, 10 years old, 9, 10 years old. And I can, one of the things I talk about in Loveable to sort of make sense of this false self, because it seems like a very sort of amorphous concept, is that I think of the false self as a castle that we build around our true self to protect us. And the false self is built in 3 stages. That castle is built in 3 stages. And the first is the castle walls that we build, right? So the first stage of our false self are the ways that we hide ourselves behind walls. And you can see this happening for 9 and 10-year-olds pretty consistently. Like, this is the moment where they all of a sudden they care about which clothes they wear to school because their friends are wearing Nike clothes, and so now they want to wear Nikes, or all of their friends like to play basketball, so now they want to play basketball, or there's a particular table in the lunchroom that you're supposed to want to sit at. This is where we start to lose our individuality in order to blend in and sort of hide so we can't get hurt anymore. So that's the false self walls that we build. Then to usually around 12, 13 years old, middle school in the United States is when we start to add cannons to the walls. And those are the more aggressive things that we do in order to keep people at bay. You know, I'm going to hurt you before you can hurt me. Could be as simple as gossip, or that inner critic that is constantly criticizing everybody else so that we don't feel so bad about ourselves. Can get physically violent when nations act on their false self cannons. It turns into wars, you know, those sorts of things. But we're usually building that level of our false self around 12 or 13. So you have your walls, you have your cannons, and you have the final part of the false self, which is our thrones, which is the more elevated, usually arrogant to some extent, places where we feel like we've arrived, right? We have some power, we have some prestige, we have possessions, we sort of feel like, hey, I've proven I'm good enough now. And we sort of camp out in that space of achievement and accomplishment and control. And so usually that starts to happen in early adulthood as we establish our spaces in the world. And the thing that I want to communicate to parents is that this is totally normal, right?
I was just about to ask that. So do you think this is like normal for just listening to you? You know, you've talked about the walls, the cannons and the thrones. Would you think what would cause a child to actually start doing that? Is that sometimes am I right? Just maybe it's peer pressure or background, culture?
It's a great question. I mean, my experience of it and my understanding is that it's the trigger for beginning to build that is the message of shame, that you're not good enough the way you are. So you have to start hiding who you are. You have to
Okay.
start protecting who you are. You have to start elevating who you are, because the way you are isn't good enough. And that shame, as we said, it comes accidentally through us as parents, but it also comes through, yes, peers. It comes through teachers. It comes through media. Then it begins to come through our own inner voices, right? Our own self-critical voices. And so
it's like a
our own
voice
voices
that gets louder and louder and louder, then enables you to start doing walls, cannons. Okay.
In Loveable, I talk about it as the voice of shame that begins to build within us. And most of us can hear it. I think most of the parents who are listening, if they slow down and pay attention, they'll notice they've got two phrases that repeat oftentimes in their heads. I'm not blank enough, or I'm too blank. I'm not interesting enough, or I'm too boring for people to really love me, is my core shame phrase, which is, by the way, a very vulnerable shame phrase to have for a public speaker. That you're not interesting enough, right? It's always back there. They're going to be more interesting. They're going to quit listening. So as that shame voice starts to get louder and louder, we need more and more protection. So we build that ego or that false self castle taller, stronger, more aggressively, more arrogantly. And so that's the third stage of life. And that's what's happening from like age 10 into early adulthood. And then what we discover is that at some point, that false self starts to backfire. Like, it was designed to get us love. It was designed to preserve our connections, right? And then all of a sudden, it's actually creating the opposite. It's creating more loneliness. It's creating more conflict. It's creating more disconnection, because at my best, I'm arrogant and aloof and higher than everybody, right? And judging and looking down on them. The winner's circle is a lonely circle, so to speak. And so that initiates the fourth stage of life, which is the rest of our lives, which is the awareness that this self that I've built is not really who I am. It's just a set of protections to protect who I really am. And now the rest of my life is about remembering and reconnecting with that true self that I originally came into the world with, the self that God created for me. And that's the journey of the rest of our lives. And in the rest of our lives, oftentimes becomes a sort of dance between, oh, there's my false self protecting me again. What would it look like for me to actually live authentically for my true self in this moment without protection? What would it look like for me to show up vulnerably rather than defensively? And so life sort of becomes this dance of learning, when is my false self protecting me? When is my true self actually showing up? And those are wonderful moments, right? When my true self shows up. And so my encouragement to parents is, yes, your kids are going to pick up shame. I don't know anybody in the history of humankind who has not, well, maybe one person out of all, but for the rest of us, mere mortals, I don't know anybody who hasn't picked up the message that they're not good enough the way that they are. I don't know anybody who hasn't built a false self to protect themselves then. Now, I know a lot of people who camp out in that false self and never get around to remembering and rediscovering who they really are. And so that's again, it's normal for your kids to pick up shame. It's normal for them to start to build their false self. I'll often say to my 16-year-old, I guess he's almost 8, he's 18 now. I often say to him, started when he was 16. I'll often say to him, like, dude, enough ego cannons for today. Like, I get it. Like, you're in that phase where you're getting angry and you're going to hurt before you get hurt. But like, I can't handle anymore today. So that's my way of acknowledging this is normal. I get it. You're going through this, and hopefully raising awareness for him that what he's doing is not reflective of who he is. It's protecting who he is. And so
when your teen bursts out in you get that in young teens. I have a 15-year-old, and often at time, we'll be saying something and she'll probably take it very personally, and it could be because of an inner shame that she's feeling.
That's right.
From something, so she'll burst out with it. And you've got to say, basically, she's not bursting out in anger at you, it's probably because
Right.
of what her inner thoughts and fears.
She's
and
just
feelings.
saving her, she's saving her true self from more shame in that moment.
Mm.
I tell a story that I love in Loveable. I think it's in Loveable. It's an anecdote I heard from somebody, a guy named Peter Rollins, and he tells it. It's the story of a rich Texas oil man who discovers he's got a long lost cousin, Seamus, over in Ireland. He wants to go meet his relative. So he goes over there, and Seamus is showing him around his humble little property in Ireland. And the oil man says, well, you should see my property in Texas. I can't even drive my car to the edges of it. And Seamus looks at him and says, my car's broken too. And the idea being that in that moment, Seamus sees, this is the throne on your castle that you have to promote yourself as having such a large property, right? I see the brokenness that is giving rise to the need to promote yourself in that way, right? And so, to the example you just shared, when our kids are angry and they're acting out, if we can sort of have the awareness and see the brokenness and the hurt and the vulnerability from which that is arising, then we are actually we are in a way maintaining a connection to their true self on their behalf that they may not be able to maintain in that moment. And that's the most powerful thing we can do as parents, to maintain that connection to our kids' true self while they are journeying away from it for a time, as they will inevitably do. So that when they're ready to remember, we can say, I remember who you are. I know who you are. Let me tell you about that. So this is part of what we do as parents, is we hold that awareness of their true self, even as they're losing it.
And that could come out, if you have a rebellious child, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know one of the things we want to do here is we sort of, we want to find the intersection of our own inner work as parents, right? And the way that we're caring for our children. And I think a rebellious child is a great example of that. So I think of, if I could define what is love, it would be love is striving to find the balance between empathy and boundaries. Oftentimes we think of love as only empathy or only boundaries, but that love is the balance between the two. And what happens for us as parents is when we fear for our children, exclusively fear for them, then we sort of err in the direction of only boundaries. Like we're afraid for them, they're rebellious, we see where this could end up, we remember our own rebellions and some of the mistakes we made, and so now we're all boundaries. No, you can't do this, I'm going to be in control, I'm not allowing this. On the other hand, when we hurt for our children, when we get connected with our own shame, and we're aware of how painful it can be to be insecure, to feel badly about oneself, then we tend to focus almost exclusively on empathy. Right? And when we're empathizing with our kids, it's so hard to hold boundaries, right? Because we're just like, we understand why you're doing what you're doing. It makes sense to us. We get it because we feel we're connected with our own hurt in that way. And so really, to me, the transcendent love of parenthood is about saying, I fear for you and I hurt with you, and we're going to figure out a way to understand you and empathize with you while holding boundaries that are healthy for you. And that is really the challenge for a rebellious kid, is to hold the empathy for them while still holding the boundaries that you need to have with them.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that actually leads to the other question I want to say, is that for us, in our parenting masterclass, we find that it's important for parents to have tools. Tools to help us in communicating, in our communication, and dealing with our triggers, and dealing with our inner fears. Because, like you said, we could be holding on to some form of shame or guilt, and that can. We can communicate that when we are triggered, or when we see a behavior in our child that may be causing us fear or worry or anxiety. anger and cause us to react in a very negative way. What do you advise a parent to, how do you advise a parent to overcome that then?
That's such a good question. Well, I'll tell you the practice that I've been practicing since the beginning of 2021 that has been a game changer for me as a husband and as a father. It started, I think it started back in the summer of 2019. I was co-facilitating a couples retreat, and my co-facilitator had the couples do a really powerful exercise. She had them turn their chairs and face each other's, face your partner, knees touching, eye contact. And she said, now, when I count to 3, just do what I say, no questions asked. She said, 1, 2, 3, close your hearts to each other. Don't let the other person in. Think of all the times that they've hurt you. Think of all the ways that they've made you feel badly about yourself. Protect yourself, stay safe, close your hearts, keep them out, don't let them in. 1, 2, 3. Now open your hearts to each other. I want you to pay attention to why you first fell in love with this person, the things you're grateful for, the story that you've lived over the years. Let them in, be vulnerable, be open. And then she said, now 1, 2, 3, close your hearts, and then open. And she did this several iterations of this with them. Brought us all back into a circle and said, what was it like? And everyone said the same thing because it feels the same to everybody. But when I closed my heart, I felt like a door closing in my chest and my shoulders got tight and I could feel my adrenaline go and my teeth gritting. And what was it like when you opened your heart? Everything in my body relaxed. It felt like a warm sensation, sort of a peacefulness. She said, great. We can all agree on what it feels like when you do that. But here's what I wanted you to pay attention to. You had a choice. In any moment, you have a choice as to whether you're going to close your heart or open your heart to each other. And what we tell ourselves is if someone behaves the way I want them to, then I'll open my heart to them.
Yeah.
And if they behave in a way that I don't like, I'll close my heart. But we have a choice in any moment. And I would argue every moment is more powerful and more loving and more healing and more graceful if we can stay open-hearted, no matter what's happening. And so this is the end of 2020, I was revisiting that idea and I said, this year in 2021, my New Year's resolution is that in any moment I feel my heart closing, I'm going to open it back up to my people, no matter what's happening. And I'm actually still practicing that here halfway through 2022 now. And it's been really powerful and transformative. And over the course of the year, I developed a practice for myself, which I can share with parents here. And if I'm alone, I physically do this. So what I realize now is that feeling of your heart closing, and every parent can recognize it. Like I go like this because it feels like emergency doors are just slamming shut inside of me, keeping everybody out. And so we can feel our hearts closing. And what we know is that is actually our false self coming to our defense. It's our ego, it's our protection saying, nope, I'm not going to be vulnerable and authentic. My true self is not going to get hurt again, right? And so we can feel our ego come to our defense, and the ego is always doing one of two things. It's attaching to what it wants, or it's resisting what it doesn't want. It's attaching to what it wants, or it's resisting what it doesn't want. And so one of the practices I developed over the year was, as I felt my heart closing, and this could happen in any, my kids saying something to me that I didn't like, my wife saying something that felt critical, an employee who was complaining about something at the office. Anything could cause it. So the practice that I started to engage is to notice when that heart was closing. And then I would literally, if I was alone, but if not in my head, I would hold my hands out and I'd say, okay, what am I holding on to in this moment? And what am I resisting in this moment? What am I holding on to and attached to, or what am I resisting in this moment? And what would it look like, big deep breath, to just allow this to be what it is, to just show up to this without having to change it, resist it, fix it, correct it, but just to be truly present to it with my whole self. And what most parents will discover is that their suffering is not caused by the decisions or the behaviors of their children. Their suffering is caused by their belief that they need to fix it and change it immediately. And if we can release that protective instinct to fix this, correct it, change it immediately, and we can just be present to how our people are showing up, all of a sudden we discover a lot of our suffering goes away, and we're able to engage what's happening with a greater sense of peacefulness, a greater sense of presence, greater sense of grace. And these are the things that actually promote transformation in ourselves and our relationships over time. So that's been a powerful practice for me. What am I attached to? How do I want this to go that it's not going? What am I resisting? What do I not want to experience right now? And what if I just allowed this to be what it is for now, and just showed up to it with my whole heart? What would that look like for me to do in this moment? And you know, what's interesting, my family didn't know I was practicing this until the very end of 2021 when I told my wife, and my wife's reaction was, "Oh, that's why you're more pleasant this year." and we were setting goals for 2022 as a family, and she said, "You should tell the kids about what you did in 2021." So we're sitting around the table, and I was telling the kids about this practice of open-heartedness. And my daughter, who's 12, she looked at me and she said, "Daddy, that's why when we were in the airport on the way to Mexico and everybody was upset, it's why I kept looking at you and it calmed me down." And what was powerful about that for me, number one, is I'm not normally the calm guy in the airport when things are going wrong. But that day, I was specifically practicing open-heartedness over and over again. What am I resisting about this moment? What am I attaching to? What if I just allowed it to be what it is? And my daughter noticed the shift in my energy and said, "I looked at you and it calmed me down." Right? The most powerful affirmation of the shift in parenting that was happening in that moment. And so that would be just my encouragement to parents, is to be aware of when your protections kick in, when your heart closes, and what you can do in that moment to not try to take control of it, fix it, or change it, but just release for a moment, be open to what it is, be fully present to it, and wait to see how that actually starts to change the energy and the relationships in the family.
And I guess then that's when you're more able to love yourself more, because sometimes when you're kind of like hunched, you've got so many negative emotions, and it causes you to either feel shame or guilt over and over and over again. But I guess then releasing it enables.
Well, that's very wise, because yes, half the time in the last year when I went like this, what am I attached to? It's my wife thinking that I'm doing everything perfectly. And what am I resisting? Any feedback from her about how I could do things differently, right? Yeah. And so it takes an enormous amount of self-acceptance to say, it's okay. Like, my wife can have suggestions and, and have actual sort of things she's upset about, and I'm still lovable. And so this moment is a moment of embracing also yourself, that I'm still lovable, even in the midst of the way things are, even in the midst of the way people are reacting to me. I'm still lovable. That's a very good insight, Karen.
Yeah, you're still lovable. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you for that. I know you've shared a lot. So alongside this book then, how can people access other parts of your resources?
Oh yeah. So the hub for everything that I do is my website. It's drkellyflanagan.com. So it's DR and then my name, kellyflanagan.com. And if you go to that website, you'll see in the very top header, there's a button to click to get access to the Loveable mini course, which is essentially basically take like 5 interviews, a little bit like this one, going into different aspects of the book Loveable and the Loveable journey. And so you'll get those for free. And then at the end of the 5-session course, you'll get a chance to sign up for free for my Loveable learning community. And this year, the Loveable Learning Community is doing 3 things together. And it's a great community of people. You can imagine the people who are wanting to jump further into their own lovability and the lovability of everyone around them. It's an amazing group of people. So this year we're meeting monthly on Zoom to discuss these ideas. We are meeting in person in Utah, in the United States, in October for a retreat that we're calling Companion Camp. And then we're launching my first novel together, The Unhiding of Elijah Campbell. And so we have lots of fun things going on in the community. So yeah, go to the website, click Get Access, get the course for free. And if you're interested, join the Loveable Learning Community in one of those activities, and would love to have people join in.
I know something is just telling me, I think, can you just give us like a success story of someone who has done that course? Maybe what was their challenge and then how they overcame it?
What was their challenge and how they overcame it? That's a great question. So I would say what I'm going to do is rather than give you sort of one story, I'm going to give you the most common story that I hear. Because really, Loveable is about the 3 main tasks of life: embracing our worthiness, finding belonging, and then practicing our passion and living into our purpose. But the one that really gets everyone is finding belonging. Like that's like when you check in with somebody, what do I most want in life? I want to find belonging. I want to find my place in the world with my people. And what we believe is that we have to go out and we have to be a certain way, do certain things, create a certain self in order to kind of attract a certain kind of belonging. When in reality, the challenge of life is actually, remember we talked about that castle, walls, cannons, and thrones? Every castle has a drawbridge. Every castle has a point of vulnerability in which the inhabitants can exit the castle and show up vulnerably in the world. And so what happens through the Loveable process is that we actually learn we get familiar with our castle and our protections. We get familiar with what it looks like to be vulnerable, and we start to show up authentically in the world. And guess what happens? Belonging finds us. We don't have to go find it. It finds us. The people who go, oh, there you are, peeking your head out authentically, and I totally dig you when you're authentic. Can I do life with you? Can I do that with you? Can I enjoy that with you? I celebrate you. And then of course we do that for them. Belonging finds us. And so the biggest celebration, I think, is when someone comes to me and says, I'm starting to show up authentically in the world and my people are starting to show up for me. That's super exciting for me. So yeah, thank you for asking that question.
Oh, amazing, amazing. So parents, here we are with that course, an amazing course, Loveable. And the link for that and more of the resources basically can be seen on this session as a video is being shared and on our website too. Okay, so you've shared a lot. Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly Flanagan. And can I just say, can you please, just something for us really, like a take-home activity. We ask all our guests to please give us a take-home activity, something we can do now, just based on what we've heard. Do you have
something
one
you can do now based on what you've heard? Yeah, in addition to this, well, let me give you, so this is something I try to do every evening and every morning. Walls, cannons, and thrones, remember? And that as soon as we begin to step outside of those, we are reconnecting with our true self. In fact, the moment that we become aware of our walls, cannons, and thrones in operation, we are actually re-inhabiting our true self. Because what's the part of us that can watch our false self? Right? Re-inhabiting. We are residing in our true self and watching our protection. So my core exercise for me is, I think of it like this. Every night, most of us now, the last thing we do is we're on our phones. And the first thing we do when we wake up is we're flipping through our phones, right? My encouragement is, right? Guilty, do we all do it? I mean, I don't even know if it's guilty anymore. It's just like, it's the way life is. But take 5 minutes of that time. And instead of flipping through your phone, flip through your ego. Just ask yourself, how did I sort of hide out behind my walls today? How did I fire my cannons today? How did I sit up on a throne today and kind of keep myself loftier than everybody else? And what would it look like tomorrow to do something different? And then every morning, instead of grabbing your phone right away, check in with yourself. Am I waking up behind my walls? Am I ready to fire a cannon, right? Am I ready to elevate myself above everybody today? And what would it look like to just lower that drawbridge a little and step out and be a little more authentic? This has saved my day on so many occasions, because you'll be amazed. Like, you'll go to bed in a pretty good space, feeling pretty centered, and you wake up and you're ready to fire your cannons, and you don't even realize it. You're just going out into your day on full defense mode, aggressive mode. And so if you can become aware of that,
because the habit has been built in.
Yeah, something happened in your spiritual and emotional process while you were asleep that said, I need to be more protected today. I need heavier protections. And so you step into the day more heavily protected. Boy, if we can be aware of that and stepping into our day more intentional about showing up authentically, we're like already ahead of the game. And so that's my encouragement. Practice, kind of flip through those protections at the last thing of the day, do a self-inventory and ask yourself, well, how could I have done that differently? Not in a regretful, like self-critical way, but just I get another chance at it tomorrow, right? And then when you wake up, just do that inventory again and check on where you're starting out the day at.
Lovely, lovely. And I think I'll be doing that. And I think as you were saying, I'm just thinking to myself, the fruits of the Holy Spirit. So, I mean, if you don't know where to start, think of the fruits of the Holy Spirit. Where have you not been doing the fruits of the Holy Spirit? And look at that then as the walls, the canons, and the throne.
I love that. Thank you for connecting those. Appreciate it.
No. So thank you so much, Dr. Kelly Flanagan. It's been lovely having you. And so audience, we will be ending, but don't forget that we will be sharing on our Parenting with Angel Eyes Facebook group, where we'll talk a lot more on this activity and have a prayer session too. So until then, you take care and God bless you. Bye-bye.